Afternoon, everyone. It's John Nicholson, Chief Executive Aviation New Zealand. Welcome to the second of our series of member webinars. Today we're featuring Don McCracken, who probably needs no introduction. He's the immediate past president of Aviation New Zealand. He's currently Managing Director of Aerosafe Engineering, and a number of you will know him well from his time as CEO of Starless Aviation, and before that CEO of Oceania Aviation. Before we hand over and get Don to start talking about a few things, just to catch up, because you've probably heard the PM's announcement at 1 o'clock and the comment about play it safe seemed to be the catch cry for level 2. There's a very brief reference in her comments to distancing at airports, which is suggesting that domestic aviation is opening up again. Very little detail in her announcement, but we've got meetings later on this afternoon with the Ministry of Transport, and we are working quite closely with CAA to help develop the material that CAA will put out, saying exactly what can and can't be done at level 2. And obviously the announcement as to whether we move to level 2 will be made next week. So we're certainly hopeful, and we are optimistic that there will be quite a bit of good news in the detail for aviation companies. So it suggests that more of the recovery from our viewpoint will be underway. And that's probably a very good point to bring Don in on, and just to get Don to talk a little bit about the current, or to give us his thoughts on the situation we are currently in. What should or should we not be doing? Talk a little bit about the current situation, Don.
Hi everybody, and I'm happy to sort of come on board and have some discussion. And last thing I want to do is to be coming on board to tell people how to suck eggs, because my view of the aviation industry is that you're all absolute experts. You run very professional businesses, dealt with a lot of you over the years, and you don't actually need anyone telling you what to do. You have your own views and you have your own knowledge, ability and experience, and that's hugely valuable in getting through what we have to get through. I guess just reflecting on Dave Morgan's webinar, firstly, thank you to David for being so open and transparent about the difficulties being faced by Air New Zealand. Because Air New Zealand is sort of a bit of an iconic company for us as New Zealanders. I know that over many years of being travelling around to different places in the world, and you sort of feel like you're home when you hop in that seat on an Air New Zealand jet and you're back on your own territory with your feet on the ground, because you have that security of the airline. And I think that's a huge sort of feeling of comfort that we have from having our own airline. And I'm really holding my heart out there to the people of Air New Zealand because of the difficulties they'll go through. But we'll all have to face that, and the implications of what David said, I think we have to be realistic and take those on board, which is the fact that they aren't going to be bringing anyone here to this country for quite some time, and it's going to have a huge impact on all of you. So I guess just, David talked about his background in GA, and funnily enough, David had, I think he was the chief flying instructor at the old Elephant King and Motor Holdings that I started in aviation with, and so he has a good understanding background of GA, and came up through the system. Talked about Cessna, Clyde Cessna, funnily enough, started in 1927 building Cessnas. By 1932, they shut the doors because of the Great Depression. So these things hit us for one reason and another. We don't really understand where they're coming from. A lot of sort of feeling is around the fact that this thing has hit us and we couldn't possibly understand why. But the reality is we've had pandemics since the beginning of time. right back, talking about the Spanish flu, I guess, back in sort of in 1918. They say we lost somewhere between 30 and 100 million. They don't even know, because we didn't have the ability to keep those records, and because death was such a familiar thing then with World War One. I think people just somehow tried to manage it and get through. But as I say, the industry started to develop and grow around the turn of the century, with balloons, and then into aviation, and it's grown into an enormous industry, extremely complex, highly regulated, requires huge levels of training, knowledge and equipment, technology, and it's a very, very high value industry. Everything that you do it requires constant learning and education, re-education, and what have you. And I know that we talked about this some years ago around basically how the marine industry worked and things, and talking about competitors and how businesses work. And we realised that the aviation industry is so complex, it doesn't attract everybody, as an interest. Because it is complex, it requires you to think continually, be interested in technology, be interested in systems and management, and in that sense, it has a huge value. And through the barriers to entry to getting into aviation and maintaining an aviation business are huge. The people in general aviation companies and airlines that I know and familiar with and have worked with for years, I hold my hat up to them, really. I mean, the pressure that they're under often at times, which is a huge level of knowledge and currency that needs to be maintained to stay there. So I guess just, the background is, I'm not here to tell you how to suck eggs. I mean, the last thing I could probably do is tell anyone how to save their costs. I'll tell you about the type of impact that it has on organisations when you're forced into a position where you need to save costs, because those things are often, they're not fully tangible, often they're intangible, and there's all sorts of problems that occur which cause you a lot of anxiety, stress, and they're very difficult to manage. But yeah, I guess as far as sort of seeing what's happening, I've seen the sort of feedback from survey information amongst members, and I'm absolutely heartened and not surprised at the level of integrity, knowledge and wisdom that's come out of the responses. I think there's something very hugely valuable for us to approach government for support. And the situation we're in is a sort of a chaotic situation. So without government support, the organisation and the business of New Zealand will definitely take a big hit back. So yeah, I guess happy to move on.
So, Don, one of the questions we're talking to Dave Morgan about was what can we learn from overseas? And I just find it interesting in this context that, say, in Korea, there's been a very managed approach back to business by Korean airlines. They've effectively less than doubled the number of services they are flying domestically in over a month. We're seeing a very cautious approach to rebuilding business in Vietnam with both Vietnam Airlines and Vietjet. I suppose as restrictions come off, there's a real incentive to get back into business in a big way. But those airlines seem to be taking a fairly cautious approach. And I just wonder, given you've had experience of other slowdowns in New Zealand, some of the learning that you've gained as to how you get back into business again and the way you get back into business again.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting what you're saying. I mean, the reality is when you've been in business for a substantial amount of time and you're involved with running a business and managing a business, is you're constantly attuned to success and continuing that business. If someone comes at you to interrupt it, you particularly in smaller businesses, you often behave quite tribally in that sense. John, and you almost take it that the enemy has come to take you down. Your competitors. So in business, you're always looking to be on guard, to find a way forward, to make sure that your business can succeed. And any business put under pressure immediately goes into the risk assessment type mode these days, looking for problems and things that will bring it down, will stop it operating, and you're always looking for ways to revitalize that business, get it back acting again. The reality is, in this situation, is if you take the situation I talked about earlier about, the Great Depression, there was, Cessna closed the doors. Well, they've done that a number of times in their history and been on the point of bankruptcy a number of times. The reality is the difference now is time. It's timing. It's like, business was open one day and you didn't have 10 staff and then down to 9 and down to 6 and down to 2 and down to 1, you're doing a bit of business. Actually, what's happened, someone slammed the roller door and business stopped overnight. So instantly you go, well, we haven't seen this before, and commonly in business you use simple tools like I've used Toolwell, assess where are we now, where do we want to be and how do we get there. The big problem at the moment is that the first question is the hardest one to answer, which is usually the easiest. Where are we now? We can't even describe where we're at. If you look at your own business, the only way you could really do that is to basically assess your assets, your financial position, look at your balance sheet, look at the strength of your business, what you owe, and those sorts of things, and make those internal judgments. And that's the right thing to do, because in the beginning, you are able to control a lot of those things. I guess it depends on what phase of the business cycle you're in. If you're a new business and you've been experiencing growth, you're probably going to be a bit cash short. You may have borrowed quite a bit to purchase, operational equipment and extended yourself, and you're going to be vulnerable. And so those questions, I guess you just have to approach with sort of full candor, take a look in the mirror and don't bullshit yourself. I think you've got to be absolutely realistic about that. The companies that have been around a long time in New Zealand, very well established companies, very high level of safety practice, operational practice, integrity, have seen these type of problems come before, not exactly like this. They never are the same, but they're able more to deal with the fact that they need to adjust very quickly. I don't like to use the restructure word because it usually puts the fear of God into everyone, but the reality is you need to adjust your business for the current environment. Understanding that current environment, not an easy problem at the moment.
So if sales is important and your financial position, what, excuse me, the relationship with your bank or funding providers, any advice about that sort of or those sorts of relationships?
Yeah, I mean, I guess, in reality, when you're in business, if you're a business that's growing and developing, you'll have a close relationship with your bank. I mean, the bank is generally, that's how you carry out your transactions in a business. They're often the funders of what you're doing. You'll have facilities that allow you to trade, and so the bank is your partner. They're part of your business and invested in that business. You'll have, particularly with aviation, often other financial institutions that are there to provide funding on equipment, and that may be purely that. But your bank is part of the operational business. The thing I would say about banking and as a partner is that when you're healthy and you're growing and your cash is good and things are going well, you see the friendly, warm face of the bankers. They come and visit and send you tickets to the rugby and all those sorts of things, and they're very warm. They come and have tea and scones and coffee, and and you have some lovely meetings and meet some lovely people. When you get in a position when that is not that's not the case, so for some reason you may be under a bit of financial duress and things have become tough, you've run out of working capital and you keep asking for money, and they are in a particularly risk-averse position as far as their thinking. There may be all sorts of things going on in the economy. For instance, the last 12 months they've been talking about the 90-year meltdown. Well, where does that come from? Well, it's a sort of a normal thing that they've been talking about recently, about every 90 years everything melts down, and add up the 1842 failures and the 1930 failures, and now the 2020s coming. Well, the reality is COVID-19 has actually accelerated that very quickly and slammed the garage door shut. So no point in talking about that because we're in it now. But the reality is that when the bank senses that the risk is too great, they will be a very interested party in your business. So you go from the smiley face emojis to the straight line emojis, and you have a lot of meetings, and you provide them with lots of data, and your cash and your invoicing, and you get friendly on terms, but you have a different look about your face. So, but the reality is they're invested in it, but they have some very strict control rules that they have to follow, because at the end of the day, they've got investors' money in the bank. None of us would like to think that our bank that we put our money in would go out and frivolously play around with it and risk it. So I don't have any argument with that. That's just the game, and that's just the way it's played. So your bank is very important, but under times of stress in a business financially, they will tell you pretty quickly when you need to sharpen up and what you need to do. So it's a management issue. It's a matter of staying close to them, communicating openly, and doing the things that you say you'll do.
Okay, so going on that finance theme, so the relationship with the bank now and through the recovery is going to be very important. One of the things that seems to me that companies can control, provided they can trade, is their cash and therefore sales and therefore income. So if we just look back at a little bit of history and we see things improving, companies coming out of restraint or restrictions, one of the common ways back into business is to drop prices. And I've certainly heard from a New Zealand viewpoint, we've got to be encouraging a travel local program, and everyone's got to drop their prices, and it's got to be made really attractive for Kiwis to travel around New Zealand again. But it also seems to me that that's a bit of a slippery slope if we're looking at rebuilding business based on discounting prices.
Yeah, complex situation, and often brought up as the first thing: drop your price, get more work. I mean, having spent a lot of my life travelling around New Zealand and particularly in the South Island, and tramping and climbing the mountains and what have you, and loving that area, I know a huge number of Kiwis gain enormous amounts by travelling around and seeing what we have to offer. So I think that's the value that we should sell, is more around go down into these areas and see what's there. I mean, often people think, they'll see a television program and they'll look at it and think, well, I should go there. Look, isn't that fantastic? Look at that beautiful fjord. And how do you get there? Well, you get on a plane and you fly down, and then well, I might take a helicopter ride. I'm 82 and I don't feel like, going on a bus ride for 5 hours. I think I'll fly over there and have a look, and they'll take me and we'll have a picnic and go back. So you have that decision to make based on your discretional cash that you've got and what you're able to spend. That experience to operate aircraft, run a business, it requires knowing what it costs to operate, and that's a continuous variable by fuel prices and the other things that affect us day to day. staff and those sorts of things. But you can't run a business. You can't run a business unless you're profitable, because you can't grow. If you're in a difficult position where there is no ability to grow because there's hardly anyone there, you at least must survive. You must meet a break-even point. Otherwise, you have to sort of wind down and close up shop. But to drop your prices is reasonable if you need to keep your aircraft operating and you need to keep your staff employed and wages paid and bills paid. But you can't go below that break-even point. It's for a period of time. It's definitely risky, and to do that basically undermines your whole fiduciary responsibility as a director. If you're a company owner, you have to make sure the business is able to go forward and be break even for a short period, even if it's not profitable. And because growth is developed by people wanting to do things, not look at that, I've got a helicopter sitting out on the line, everyone will come and want to jump in it and pay money, because it just doesn't work that way. It's always down to what do people want to do and what experiences do they want to see, and what's their ability to go and see those, and if we offer this service, who will we get? And the problem is it's that small scale thing, John, so we start off, and I talk about it in trainings I've done some years ago around what I call port analysis. So the sailing ship comes from far away and it pulls into the new land that it's discovered, and it goes ashore and gets water. They row ashore and fill the barrels, and they take on some possessions and some food, and then they sail away. And a bit like that sailing ship behind you in that picture there in those days. And so what happens then? It comes back the following month, and then after a period of time, it says, well, it's a bit difficult. And someone says, well, that sailing ship comes in here. Some of the locals get together and they build a wharf, and then the wharf ends up with a shed on it. The shed prepares the water and sells the goods, and a port is developed. And if you look all around the world, that's what our ports were, and that's where they've come from. It's the growth of something from nothing to a enormous business. Airports are the same. It's just the mode of transportation is different. So the reality is that in that sense, it's very hard to go back. At the moment, what's happening is that our members are being faced with the position of having the tap turned off from the supply of ships to their port for their services. And that's not something that we deal with quickly. As I say, in the past, we've dealt with it through recessions where it happens over a period of time and we adapt. But at the moment, the doors slam shut. And it's a bit of the reversion wave problem. You slam the door shut, you get a reverse wave back the other way, and it takes a while to get the flow right again. So sort of what I'm seeing is that yes, in a long-winded way to answer your question, I guess, reducing your costs may be a tactic that's sensible to allow more people through your business and get more activity, because your staff will be happier when they're busier and your aircraft will like flying more. But it's not a long-term solution. But then we're not in any position where we have long-term solutions. What we have is now when we understand this problem, which will be a long way away, is how do we grow and how do we return back to normality? And it's a long-term situation. It's not something that we can solve overnight. And we need the help of government. Because in these situations, that's what governments are for. Why would we have a government if they're unable to help us when the world is so chaotic that we're unable to deal with the problems? That's why we have governments. We have the system of order.
So I'd like to go back to one of the comments you made about value, because again, this is something that companies can control rather than governments or anyone else. And I just wonder at a time, so I've seen a number of New Zealand companies, and I've seen them internationally, very good competing on price. They want to undercut first and foremost internationally the other New Zealand competitors. And when you talk about the value, and I think you've talked quite a bit about value in your answer or your comments before, I just wonder whether now is a good opportunity for companies as they rebuild to be thinking a bit more about the customer to really understand what value is that we provide to our customer, be they a consumer or be they another business, with a way to potentially repositioning yourself as a business to be more important, more valuable to your customers. Is there an opportunity to do that sort of thing right now?
Yes, yes, absolutely, John. And you know, it's something that it's been a main focus point of my whole working career, I guess, is that people, it doesn't matter what their background or where they come from, when they finally make a decision to go out and do something, they want a great experience. And those experiences are memories, you know, photographs related, and that they're long term. They're things that people think about years and years later. Remember that great trip we had? Remember that guy that took us over there on that flight, or that, you know, that lady took us, and, you know, we went down the rapids on the canoes, and all those experiences that happen. It's about the moment, what you got out of it, and that's the value aspect I see. It's not. I don't think anyone, when they really decide to let their hair down and go out and go, I'm going to go and have a great time now and have a holiday and enjoy myself, take my family, they're not back in their business mode. They're going, actually, I want the experience. I want to have a really good time. So they're actually looking, the value is not the money they're spending. It's actually what they get out of it. And you know, New Zealanders are fantastic at that. They're so friendly and open, and you know, they will put huge efforts into trying to, you know, inform the customer and help them, protect them, you know, around safety obligations and things, but also explain the experience. But often you find people, and particularly in aviation and other tourism businesses that I see, is that those people are passionate and caught up in those type of events. You know, they love the region, they love being where they are. There's no greater place than New Zealand to get out into the outdoors and enjoy those experiences. So I think, yeah, absolutely. You may not be able to discount your pricing a lot, and I definitely think you need to set some hard rules and not go below what you need to survive and exist, because that's counterproductive from a safety point of view, but also your business, you know, long-term success. But give whatever you can as far as value for what your people can do, what your staff can give those visitors that come in and spend their money in your company.
I think at the end of the day, we're a pretty unassuming lot. And I don't think we actually appreciate just how good we are at so many things. And obviously when you see results of polls and market research from overseas, they talk about the honest integrity, the great experiences that they have in New Zealand or dealing with New Zealand companies. So there are, I think, a number of real positives that we can grab by the horns and do something with. Just turning around a little bit, with a lot of the publicity about COVID-19, and just where business is at the moment, are there any threats or dangers to aviation safety that we should be aware of?
My view on this is probably, I've been involved obviously with safety management systems probably for the last 15 years or so, mainly trying to understand how they'll be effective and how we can implement them, and they've changed so much. But my view is that aviation in New Zealand is inherently safe. And the reason that I believe it is because we have a very mature aviation system. We have a huge high level of training. We have a very low level of corruption. In fact, we're lowest in the world. And the people that run our businesses have a very high level of integrity. So if we separate that out from financial gain and we separate it out from competitiveness. Those are all things that we do. We do those on the sports field. That's just part of life. That's the thing that, gets you up in the morning, sharing risk and things that get the heart beating and give us excitement. But safety-wise, the system is the system. There are people that will push the boundaries, but the reality is they'll do that anyway in a buoyant economy when things are going smoothly. When things are very difficult, as far as they are now, is that very, very quickly those people are weeded out. They will not survive. But I think the other thing is there is a huge level of communication and community type integrity where people don't want an association with people that are basically lawbreakers and will push the risk boundaries outside of the norm because it's damaging to the whole industry. And the thing is, we're a very small country, and we sort of, on the back of the aviation name, we market ourselves as, Aviation New Zealand. Well, aviation is an enormous brand globally. And, anything that happens nowadays, if it's a catastrophic event or even a minor event in the aviation scene, is immediately attuned to the media, and that goes out, and it's never good news. And that's the problem, is that we as responsible operators running businesses, to be successful, can't allow people to bring our reputation down. It's enormously damaging. And particularly when we're looking to attract tourists back to New Zealand, they need to be very comfortable with our aviation system to fly again and to operate in the environment we do. I think the safety issue is that it's about the internal integrity of the business. And if for any reason you think that there's a way that you should avoid doing something required, then immediately that doesn't fit well with what you're trying to do as far as develop and grow a safe business. And I don't think that we have a lot of that. My feeling is that people are very, very forward-coming whenever they see something that they see as not a safe outcome for the general good of all.
So, well, risk cuts both ways. There's obviously industry and industry's responsibility at managing risk. There's the responsibility for the regulator to regulate the aviation system. With the announcements out of CAA earlier this week, has the risk profile, risk approach of the regulator changed, do you think?
Put it this way, I see the industry as reasonably constant. I don't see safety altering with the ups and downs of the commercial world. And the reason for that is that it's so difficult to get complex systems working. Generally, when companies get things working, they don't want to change. And we have a high level of compliance entry to get in the system. It's not a simple thing to alter your system once you've got it developed. And remembering that most of our companies are highly scrutinized, overly scrutinized in a lot of ways. I think the reality is that companies inherently want to be safe. It's in their best interest to ensure they do not cause harm to their staff or their customers. If they do that, the first impact is on themselves. The regulatory impact to people in a regulatory office would be very low because it would be reputational, perhaps for government and those sort of things, but they're not about people being harmed. And our members deal with that day to day, every day. They deal with the direct fact that any of their actions, if not absolutely astute with the right level of integrity and behaviour over them, could cause harm. So I just don't think that regulatory oversight in a too controlling manner has any impact at all. The regulator is there is to provide safety oversight and to regulate, to do checks and balances, and to communicate with the industry and see where the risks are. That's its job. It doesn't need to do anything from that. The industry will ensure safety to its customers.
Mm. And I think the regulator changes, it changes the director from time to time. The way that it acts or relates to the industry seems to change from time to time. We're obviously in a new environment now that will see further change as far as the regulator is concerned. We've had some initial contact with some of the new managers, and perceptions seem to be pretty good for the approach and the desired relationship with industry that these new people want.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, like business as well as economies and things are, they follow a sinusoidal wave pattern. We have down periods and we have up periods. And that's no different from regulators and controlling bodies. We have periods when we really work together well and understand each other, and the outcomes are great. We have periods where we don't communicate so well, we don't understand each other. But I have some sympathy for regulators in the sense that often the tasks that they have to follow are onerous around gathering information and things that really don't add any safety value whatsoever. I think that they often are driven from internal pressures to follow down paths that actually don't benefit anyone. The important thing about that is that I guess that they are regulators and they do have the authority, and the best way to ensure that everybody is safe and everybody that visits our country is in the best, safest, protected position that they could be in is for the industry and the regulator to work closely together for collective outcomes that benefit all.
Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, they are regulators, not controllers. Don, we've just about reached the end of the webinar. I just thought, if there are any other general comments that you'd like to make to members about what they should be doing as we look at a recovery of sorts?
Yeah, I guess that it's very, very difficult for some. All I can say is, having been through it a number of times, I know that there will be some of you that have to go through downsizing. Redundancies are extremely painful and difficult. The only comment I would make is, if you're the owner or the CEO, get involved. Don't hand it on to your HR people or contract it out. It's extremely painful for those that have to go, and it's extremely painful for those that have to do it, because there is a lot of discussion and talk around, our employment regulations and, oh, we're not getting rid of a person, we're getting rid of a role and all that. But a person never sees themselves as a role. They see themselves as a person, and a person that should be treated with respect and decency. And it's never easy, because when you have to look at someone and they're saying, well, why do I have to go? And you have to tell them, well, we're just getting rid of your role. That is the biggest load of bullshit I've ever heard in my life. And the reality is, you are having to get rid of them, and you have to be honest to them and tell them the truth. And the thing is, those are very difficult things for companies to go through. You just have to do them. They're important because those people worked for you and were committed to doing what they did. And the circumstances are outside of their control and yours. So that's one thing. The other thing is, face the brutal facts. Look at your business. Look out ahead. If you're not going to make it, face the brutal facts. Find some way of pulling out, winding down, joining up with someone else, merging with someone else. Whatever you do, prolonging the situation never helps. There are enough robust companies with huge experience and knowledge. There's never enough experienced quality people in this country for aviation. We're always looking for new ones. We never train enough. They should be highly valued. And your conduct around how you conduct yourself in business as a director is the most important thing for your forward and future outcome as a leader in the country, a business leader or an employee or whatever. It's how you conduct yourself that's most important. So, but I wish everybody all the best. I can probably finish just briefly by saying what you're experiencing is nothing new. It's something completely out of the square, but it's not unpredictable. We've had pandemics before. The problem is these days, as we talk about risk, we look at risk as something that solves all problems. Risk assessment, risk management, it's not correct. The reality is we would down-tune a pandemic to a catastrophic event if it happened, but highly unlikely. So we push it right down to the bottom of the box and we don't really deal with it. So if any of you have had pandemic on your risk radar before, I'd love to hear, because you're a brilliant company and are obviously thinking way ahead. But the reality is when it faces us, we're absolutely shocked and astounded that we never saw it coming. But the reality is it's been before. What you can do about it, that's a whole different problem. But all I know is that solving problems can only be solved if you know that the problem's coming. And I use this example of teaching people about looking forward. You can actually predict, but there's always uncertainty. So if you look at a tree on the horizon, a couple of months ago, you'd see a beautiful oak tree covered in leaves, and at the moment you'll see it covered with golden leaves turning to red. And in 3 or 4 months' time, you're going to see that it's just a tree with no leaves, just branches. But you can predict that because you know that happens every year. It's called autumn and then winter. What you can't predict is that lightning hits it and has to be chopped down with a chainsaw, or someone wants to put a motorway through there and that tree's gone. And those are the uncertainties that we know can happen, but we don't know when. Well, we've all been hit with the when, and the when is now, and the time is very short because the pandemic has hit us over a very short period of time. But I do know that aviation people are exceptional people, highly intelligent, hardworking, and they are resilient, and they will recover, and we will get back to normal in some time in the future. I don't know when, but the big thing is be prepared to do some work and don't receive any money. Just get on with it and see if we can all help each other, and do what you can locally, close in your community and around, things that you can actually do. Don't try and solve the bigger problems that are going on because they're global. We should just try and solve our own problems first. So that's pretty well it, John, as far as I'm concerned.
Don, thank you very much indeed for your time this afternoon. Thank you for the questions that have come in to help me fill out the questions that I was going to ask you. I think one of the key points for me, and you've actually reiterated something that Dave Morgan said in the last webinar, and that is get the facts and act on the facts. Don't put off decisions. Take responsibility. As leaders of the business, lots of that responsibility sheets home to you, and you should be prepared to take it. Don't mollycoddle and think things might be better. Oh, they might be better still, because chances are they won't be. So the need to take some hard decisions based on imperfect facts may be the sensible thing to do. I think you've made some very interesting comments about value, about relationships, about local relationships, and at the end of the day, the importance of keeping on talking to one another, looking at other opportunities, looking at ways of grasping things, and when we see new opportunities, go for the new opportunities, because they will be there, and if we don't take them, someone else will. So Don, thank you very much for your time. To all of the listeners, thank you very much for your time as well. We will put the webinar on the Aviation New Zealand homepage reasonably soon. We just do a little bit of playing around with some of the imagery that's on it, but we'll put that up as soon as we can for everyone. So this ends number 2 in the webinar series. We've got webinar number 3 underway, and will come out to you quite soon with details about that. But it will be moving on from the big airline perspective into Don's comments on where we are, more from a smaller viewpoint, but with a lot of advice for small, medium-sized businesses. And we'll look a little further ahead in the next webinar by which point we'll also be well into, hopefully, level 2. We'll have a good understanding of what level 2 means, and hopefully it means that you all are doing much more business than is currently the case. So thank you all very much.